Hey everybody, Chad here. Welcome to Thought Tub Revelations. This is where I take stories from my life and mix it with revelations I've had from my hot tub, well, I like to call Thought Tub. Enjoy. Have you ever accidentally manifested something? Well, I had a friend who accidentally manifested the lottery. Today, we're going to look into it.
The definition of manifestation is not bringing something to you you don't have. It's making visible what's already here by matching its frequency.
The creative process is first imagining and then believing the state imagined. Always imagine and expect the best. The world cannot change until you change your conception of it. As within, so without.
I've had psychic type stuff happen to me my whole life. So, as you can imagine, when that happens to you, you try to figure out what's going on. And long story short, when I was 19, I had a psychic/spiritual experience in my bedroom that led me to really try and figure out what was going on. And that brought me to church. And for 25 years, I was navigating my way through Christianity. And eventually I came out the other side. So this true story is back from my Christian days. These were my early Christian days in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I worked with my friend Larry, night shift at a grocery store. We were both Christians, except I was a Pentecostal, radical, and probably pretty annoying Christian. I believed in miracles, that God could speak today, and my life's goal was to raise somebody from the dead, if you can believe it. But my friend Larry, he was an equally passionate but Baptist. So that's more legalistic. The girls would wear long dresses. They pretty much took themselves out of society in many different ways. No alcohol, only certain movies. Of course, if you're a Christian, Seinfeld's okay, but a lot of other stuff, not so much. But the difference in how we saw God was that I believed that God could speak and do miracles today. And that Larry believed that that wasn't the case, that God doesn't speak anymore, and that miracles rarely would ever happen. And he also believed that the only way you could hear God speak is through the Bible, the Word, and through diligent study of the Word is the only way that we could hear God's voice. So we had a lot of great times on the night shift. He was a very fun guy, and we would get into heated arguments about our differences. I'm sure I was called a heretic a time or two. I probably had it coming. But what Larry and I really connected on was the Bible. We both really believed that if we studied the Bible, that there was truths in it that we could unlock that would help our life. And that was where we really connected. And at work, we were pretty good friends. Work friends. At work, you're best friends, yet you never see each other outside of work. It's almost like they only exist at work. If you've seen the hit TV show Severance, you would know what I'm talking about. Our innies were the best of friends. But then one day Larry got transferred to another store. And I didn't see him for probably maybe a year and a half. And then eventually I got transferred to that other store to work with Larry again with his help. Our innies really looked out for each other at work. Well, that's a Severance joke. You'll have to watch it in order to understand that one. Anyways, so Larry and I were working with each other again. And the first night back, we went to Tim Hortons, had a nice coffee break, and we're catching up. And he said to me, "Did you hear what happened?" And I said, "No, what happened?" And he began to share with me about his pursuit of financial freedom through using the scriptures. There are many scriptures in the Bible where they indicate that God will interact with our finances and bless us, and that we can harness those truths and release them in our own life. And so him and his wife, they began to wholeheartedly do everything they could to have God's favor on their finances. And he had two things that they were hoping and praying for. One was for his school debt to be paid off, and the other was for his mortgage to be paid off, that he would be free of the burdens of those debts. One of the scriptures he refers to was Malachi 3:10, and it's about, "Bring ye the tithes into my storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and see if I will not open the floodgates of heaven with so much blessings that you can't contain it." And the thing that's interesting about that verse is that's the only time in the Bible that God says it's okay to test him. So Larry did that. Him and his wife, wholeheartedly, they began to give to missions, to the poor, and I think to their local church, which are all things that I question nowadays. But I think it's not about the action, but it's about his intent and his heart. And they were giving all of their money away. In fact, sometimes they didn't even have enough money for food. And he had a few stories of how they didn't have any money, and they would miraculously stumble across a $20 or a $50 bill or something to get them through until his next paycheck. And of course, it was exciting at first when they're doing this. And as the months go on, it starts to get harder and more difficult and more difficult. And then there were some health issues that had cropped up between him and his wife. And he got to the point where he was defeated. He was drained. And I remember he told me that he was in his kitchen, and his health burden was weighing heavy on him, and his financial burden. And then he heard a voice, not audibly, but internal audible. And that voice said, "You haven't asked me for anything yet." And then he realized that he had never asked, but he was just doing. And so he said, "I ask you to solve this health issue and to pay off our mortgage and my school debts." And soon after that, the health issue was resolved. And wouldn't you know, I think it was around a week later or so, his mom won $1 million. And she paid off his school debt and his mortgage. I was shocked. I mean, not only about the $1 million, but just that he said that God spoke to him. That was something we had many arguments about. But you can't argue with experience. And the other thing that shocked me was that Christians, especially more legalistic Baptist-y type, really not fans of gambling and the lottery. In fact, they're quite against it, and in the past we had had many conversations about it. And that story has always intrigued me because it really does match up with what I experienced when I was in Christianity. I always found when I was trying to interact spiritually, trying to lay a hold of these spiritual truths and to bring them into my life, that they often went against the traditional narrative that was preached. I remember I've said to myself 1,000 times, God is not religious. The way I was led, the confirmation I would get to make certain decisions or go certain places or leave this and leave that, they were always never religious and always very offensive to my religious side. Which, if you know anything about the teachings of Jesus and the stories of him in the Gospels, that's what he was. In fact, he was killed by the religious leaders. So he was no fan of organized religion. And back to Larry. So, what happened? What did he do that caused this accidental lottery manifestation? Well, really, he just enacted just regular old manifestation principles. If you've ever read the book The Secret or any of the other countless manifestation books, it's quite simple. And in fact, most of the manifestation books I've ever read often quote Jesus in this one scripture verse where he says, "When you pray, believe you have received." And that's the secret. Of course, easier said than done. But it works. And that's the sad thing about all those Southern word of faith money preachers is that, they know that these principles work. And they're getting people to enact and to get these principles, lay a hold of them in their own life to give more money back to them. To me, that's pretty evil. And the lesson that I get from this story and watching that play out in Larry's life is that we can do and accomplish anything that we put our mind to. See, Larry put every fiber of his being into trying to lay a hold of this truth. And in fact, when he did lay a hold of it, it showed him more truth than what he was expecting. And it gave him an opportunity to maybe loosen the burden of religion a little. And of course, we both got different jobs, went on our separate ways. And I have no idea how his innie is doing right now. Sorry, another Severance joke. But I sure hope that he remembers the truth that he laid a hold of. That the universe is even more loving than all the gods of the religions combined. That it's not a rules, obedience-based system, but it's one that works on love and frequency and vibration, which is something that no one can manipulate. And I wanted to talk about this accidental lottery manifestation today, to just talk about some manifestation principles and how he accidentally discovered it was true. But now as I go through it, I have something even greater than this pressing on me. And that's the idea that, can we handle the truth? Are we prepared for the truth? Because Larry got more truth than he bargained for. He was just believing and wanting to lay a hold of these spiritual principles to interact with his finances, and he got even more than that. He had a voice speak to him, which he had argued with me for years that doesn't happen. And he got his prayer answered through gambling, which indicates that the source he was dealing with and interacting with wasn't too concerned about it. Now, I'm not a proponent of gambling, but what I'm saying is there is a different perspective going on. And he got a truth, an answer to prayer outside of his own belief system, which gave him an opportunity to change his mind. And that makes me think of the famous scene in the Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson movie, A Few Good Men.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
It's a great scene, and it's true. Do we really want the truth? Because it may not be what we're expecting. In Larry's case, when he laid a hold of this principle or truth, it was so powerful that it challenged his own ideology. And that's what I had always found in my own experience with religion, that my interaction with the, God, or maybe what I would now refer to as the phenomenon, was always nicer than the actual religion itself. And that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that I think about all the time lately. It's easier to fool someone than it is to convince them they've been fooled. I found it hard in some areas of my life to change my mind just because I'd spent so much time devoting my life to the idea. And to let go of that idea would be maybe some form of public admission that I had been fooled. But maybe it all comes down to, how bad do you want the truth? Or, well, maybe not how bad do you want it, but how much will the truth cost you?